All right, here we go.
Oh, yeah.
Me and you, Todd.
Wait.
No Tom.
No Tom?
Nope. Tom is on Operation NutBowl. We will explain that at a later date.
Well, wasn't Alan supposed to fill in?
Alan got grounded. He didn't clean his room. Wife revoked his pass, wouldn't let him go anywhere. Power and speed. We're back. I think Tad's going to try to fill in for Tom stuff. Let's see how he does. Go ahead, Tad.
Okay. You can always call us at 908-751-0211. But we're never going to get calls. We never do. And you can like us on iTunes or Facebook, but everybody that's listening already knows that and probably hasn't anyway, so what's the matter?
Admirable job, Tad. That really wasn't too bad. Really wasn't bad at all.
Mm.
So, yeah, Alan was going to come in. He canceled last minute. I really don't know what happened with him. He's been kind of off the hook all day, but that's okay.
Well, give him a chance. He's working with a Mopar trying to chase down a Corvette, so he's got to have
what is that thing, a flounder? No, a Barracuda. That's what it is.
Yeah, something to that extent. It's an A-body, not an E-body.
I don't know enough about Chryslers to know what they really are.
I unfortunately do, but...
Yeah, I know you've had a few of them. I've never actually owned that type of Chrysler. I've had...
Old.
Yeah, nothing like that. Tom is, I guess, on his way to L.A., and he goes from L.A. to Japan for something he's doing over there. So he'll be back. I don't even know if he comes back next week. I think it might be the week after.
Yeah, I thought we had 2 weeks off from him.
Maybe. Off from him? That's really nice. Well, just, keep working, Tad. Maybe you'll work your way up here. So what we're going to have tonight is, who's our guest, Tad? You can go over that. Give you something to do. Come on.
Well, I can't even look at anything right now because I'm on deck. I can't remember his last name. Scott.
Holy shit. You shorted out in 3 seconds.
That's all it takes.
Scott Clark.
Sorry. He
Keep going.
He contacted us today. He's going to be coming to the studio. Not exactly our first guest because we've had other people, but it's going to be our first official off, the show to come here. I mean, we've had Jeff here, but Jeff's not official.
Yeah. Well, Scott Clark used to be with DIY Auto-Tune, which obviously Mega Squirt, everybody knows who he is. He's out on his own now doing, I guess, tuning and tuning classes. Education full time. And he's going to have a class that's going to occur here in New Jersey, and it's at Fonts Performance, which is in Sicklerville, I believe, New Jersey.
I'm not sure.
It's down South Jersey. It's not terribly far from us. I mean, you can kind of get if you're in the middle of New Jersey, you can get to either end in like an hour. So, one way or the other, he's probably within an hour. And that's something I'm actually thinking about trying to get there for that. I think that might be kind of neat.
Maybe I'll catch a ride with you or something.
Yeah. No, we can go down there. Maybe see if retard Alan wants to go or something.
Yeah, but we can hit the real Roy Rogers down there.
Tad, why is it always about food, dude? Really? You got it. You got to knock it off, pal. You got it. You're going to explode. So Scott's going to be on it, I guess, I think 7:15 he's going to call in. And we got a whole bunch of fuel injection questions. I've gotten a bunch of my own over time as, my whole, project is progressing here. And I'm thinking he's probably the most qualified I can think about to answer all these.
Yeah, possibly.
See, your stuff's kind of different. The Subaru guys,
yeah,
it's like they're all kind of in this little community. They all use sort of the same stuff, computer wise. Like,
yeah,
I mean,
well, there's a few options, but everybody's zoning into the one.
But it doesn't seem like most people in the Subaru side are changing out the stock computer or doing anything different, are they?
They were, but I think they've got to the open source so they can hack the factory ECU to the point that you don't need to.
Well, when you say open source for these things, you mean that they opened up the stock computer?
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
I don't even know enough, so I'll probably just throw myself under the bus. But yeah, I'm pretty sure they plug in and they can just
Well, I heard Junior say something about an open source tune.
Right.
And I don't know if that means it's constructed by an open source program or that it was just a way for them to get into the computer. I don't know enough about it, but people talk about access ports but it seems like your side of things is pretty simple.
There's a lot of piggybacks, and then there's going completely into the stock ECU. So you were going to ask about piggyback, so that'll fall a little bit under
right, but most of the piggybacks for the Subaru are made to do this, right? Like you buy a computer, and I guess there's like a jumper harness or something, and
the OBD2 port or something like, and then
really they plug in through there.
They flash through there, yeah.
Well, then they're not piggybacked. Piggyback would be two computers.
Well, yeah, I have a piggyback on mine right now, but they're
Well, yeah, because you've got
now.
that goofy Japanese domestic market.
Well, no, it was on my domestic one until I blew it up. Then I put the Japanese motor in with the Japanese ECU, blah blah blah. But it went to either one.
Well, at any event, with the GM stuff, with the LS stuff, and I can't speak about the modular Ford stuff. I have no idea what those guys do. But it seems like that there's a million different types. We've got, brand wise, obviously in the drag race world, Big Stuff 3
Right.
seems to be extremely popular. Pro EFI, of course, the Holly, Mega Squirt. I mean, we can go down the list of all the different ones. And then you've got stock PCM tweaking and tuning. And the thing that turned me off about the stock PCM was it seems like from and I own HP tuners.
Right.
I've opened it. I've looked at it. I plugged it into a car, but I haven't done anything with it. It seems like it's all a sequence of like lying to the factory vehicle. I mean, to the factory computer about
to do what you want it to do.
It's a series of lies to make the computer work and make it, give you the desired result. I'm not really a fan of that.
Well, it's like when I was looking at my Mark 8, that's got one of the EEC computers that with all the Mustangs all had, blah, blah, blah. You have to find out which series it is so you can put a plug to it or figure out how to screw, mess it up and fool it and everything. I was just like, I'd rather do a piggyback than try to like sit there and screw it around with your stock ECU. Mm-hmm. But at that point, what am I going to say? I'm not a tuner. So,
yeah, well, I mean, this is from the tuning perspective. I'm sure that I could figure it out, but I know that I don't want to.
Right.
I don't want to learn all this in one shot, especially when you're trying to do your own stuff.
Right.
Not going to say it's bad to learn, but when you kind of have something you need to get accomplished, sometimes your time is better suited with other stuff. So this is where a guy like Scott comes in handy. He's worked on everything. I mean, we've talked to him about his different, tuning abilities, what computers he's used, what he thinks about certain ones. And so this will be a good conversation with him. And I mean, I want to know, you and I were talking about flex fuel.
Yeah.
Now for us up here, I mean, I think there's one in Newark and I think there's one.
Yeah, one by Newark Airport, I do believe.
Yep. And I think there's one way down South Jersey, but we don't have E85 here.
I'm not going to go searching for one since we don't have the time, but I know there's a list of them, but I haven't yet checked that for years, so who knows if they're still going or not.
I looked at that list probably maybe 2 months ago to see, and nothing. The only two that ever showed up was one like in the Newark area,
right,
and one like way down South Jersey. Newark is probably 40 minutes from me. South Jersey, where that was, I think was probably an hour and a half.
So you're going to be half a tank of gas done by the time you come back up from getting your gas.
Well, I guess it would be to bring it back, in like drums or whatever, if that's what you want to use day to day.
Yeah, but remember, it's real hydroscopic, so you got to make sure it's sealed. So
word of the day,
yeah.
By Thaddeus, hydroscopic. Picks up water.
Yeah. Well, didn't we have somebody that wanted to do complete methanol in their vehicle for some reason?
Yeah, that would be Fudd. Fudd. And I mean, he has some points here. If you're going to go through the aggravation of using E85, but the only thing that E85 would be better for is that it's at the pump. But
right.
If you don't have pumps around here that are E85, doesn't really matter. But that's where like the flex fuel sensor comes in. And I do see that guys are using that with a Holly. But
really?
now, and because you don't do this is like anything else. When you're trying to learn about a technology or a method of doing something, you don't have a full understanding of it. So you have so many questions. You can't, like I'm thinking about this. You put a flex sensor on. Do you have to set a 0? Like, okay, this is my baseline.
Right.
Are they calibrated for baseline? How does it know? What if you had E85 and then used, E98, which I think is made by VP or a couple other people?
Yeah.
Which is, I guess, essentially approaching, just straight E80, ethanol. So, I mean, and then how does the tuning range work in this stuff? Does it really incrementally handle? And is it entirely based on a math calculation? Like, well, you have this much more available free oxygen in the 85, so the flex sensor lets it run over a very broad range and work well?
Actually, it's something that I could have asked I'll drop a name, Junior, because he used to do that stuff, but I haven't talked to him. And so last time I talked to him, I was with you at Englishtown, so who knows?
So there's lots of questions with this stuff, and I think Scott will clear a lot of it up. Now, I believe this particular course he's going to have is considered a basic. I think this is kind of like from what I read quickly, and we'll let him describe it a little more, but it looks like it's a start, how to get started. Like probably the wiring, what the sensors are, what they do.
Our other tuner here online, Jeff Chang, said flex sensors tune up or down based on content.
Okay. How do they know how far up or down they can or cannot tune? Like, how do they know what zero is? I mean, because we don't even have it unless I went to the airport to get, whole nother fiasco with the 85 and small engines and everything else. Unless I went to the airport, I can't get a non-E85 fuel here. There isn't any.
Yeah, it's true.
Now, Alan's buddy, Jeff in Wisconsin, he says he actually have, I think it's like no E or something it's called, and it has no ethanol, none. They can actually buy it at the pump.
Right.
We don't have that option.
No.
There's probably some bullshit environmental reason why we can't have it here or something. Who the hell knows? So, I mean, again, well, look, we'll save all this for Scott because we're sitting here like two fucking morons, like,
Well, I'm looking at what Jeff's sitting there. You got to set the slope, and I was like, okay, it's
okay. Thanks, Jeff. Fantastic. Well, look, Scott's online now, so let's get him in. Hang on, Mr. Clark. How are you?
Good. Can you guys hear me? Okay.
Yep. Hear you just fine.
I figured I better call, man. It's a few minutes early, but I better call.
Well, you heard us trying to figure out how an E85 sensor worked?
Oh, yeah. We can start with that.
Well, let's start with, you had told me that you are kind of out on your own now. Why don't you explain what you're doing and what your plan is?
Well, right now, I guess as of about last August, decided to leave DIY AutoTune and went out on my own. I was really, really getting into the education that they had me doing classes, right? And it was kind of a busy schedule. It got to the point where we were doing probably 2 a month, and those are on the weekends, and then doing the regular engineering work during the week and the support stuff. We decided it was probably best for me to go out and do nothing but the education. I was just having too much fun with it, and there was obviously much bigger demand than we thought for specific type of training, like not just EFI in general or theories and concepts, but look, how do you get this car from 0 to ready to go on the dyno or making poles or tuned or at the track, tuning traction control, specific type of training. And so I've been doing that probably about 2 weekends a month, it looks like, is the kind of the schedule I'm able to keep up, but traveling around the country and holding just really small little seminars where we'll spend 2 days and everybody kind of gathers around a couple of cars that we bring to the shop. And we start from, installing Standalone all the way through, dyno tuning, complete dyno tuning. It takes about 16 hours.
Okay. Oof. Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess if you're starting from scratch, it makes sense that it would, especially at a pace. Like if you do this all the time, you're much better at going through it on your own because you just do things automatic. It's autopilot.
Basically, what we do is the typical install and tune that I might be able to knock out in half a day, or even less, or a couple of hours. We stretch it out for 2 full days, so it gives everybody time to stop, ask questions, do things a couple times, figure out how to get the car to start and idle nice. How to take throttle, just kind of easing into it and just kind of showing them the approach. Honestly, it's less about the system that you use than it is about the best practices that you're applying to your project. That's what I've learned in years of watching various projects, some more successful than others. There's some common themes amongst those guys that seem to do well, and it's all about their approach. It honestly is less about what system you choose. I teach the class on the Megascrew 3 systems because number one, I'm very familiar with that system. Number two, it's great for teaching on. It's kind of a science fair project in a good way and a bad way sometimes, but it has lots of functionality, like very advanced flex fuel capabilities. But I have people show up to my classes that are Holly guys or Fuel Tech guys or Big Stuff 3. And I'll take time if we need to. If they have a question, I'll stop and open up the Big Stuff software and, okay, here's how you do what I just showed you, in Big Stuff.
Well, I would imagine, that this gets into like kind of like the nuts and the bolts of a computer. If you had one given operating system, chances are pretty good the task you're trying to accomplish is available in all operating systems. It's just a matter of knowing how to get there to do it. And some make it easy, some make it hard.
In an even broader sense, if you like a higher level view of that same concept, really all your computer's got to do is open and close the injectors at the right time reliably and fire an ignition system at the right time as reliably as possible. That's 90% of choosing a system right there. And there's a whole lot of them that in this day and age, they all pretty much can do that.
Mm-hmm.
From there, you get into more feature sets and things. But, what I teach in the class is the more features a system has, the more complicated it's going to be to learn. You might be a little more frustrated when you're staring at 400 numbers in a menu that you don't understand what half of them mean, or options, versus some systems that take a very simple approach trying to make it easy on the user. So It seems to be a direct trade-off.
Okay, now, like in this school that you're going to conduct, I guess March 6th is what it would be. How does this work? You're bringing, are they like a factory car that you're retrofitting to another, computer, or is it like a transplant car that it's going to be standalone? Like, how involved does a course get that you're planning on doing out here?
So it's March 4th and 5th. That's a Saturday and a Sunday.
Okay, got it.
Performance. Yeah, and I'm going to come visit you guys after we're done there on this.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But, so, really how it works is we'll start off with a car that's probably got most of the system wired and 90% of it, but we'll take it from sitting there and had to be trailered in to getting it to start the first time. And really, that part takes almost the whole first day. There's a whole bunch of testing and configuration. What we're doing is we're putting in a completely custom, the whole brain. We're not using the factory computer whatsoever. There may still be a factory computer in the car driving gauges. It depends on if it's a modern street car, and there's still a lot of functions besides running the engine that you need those factory computers to do.
Oh, yeah.
In this case, we're controlling spark and fuel and ancillary things like boost, traction control, rev limiters, launch limiters, with a separate computer that we, bought that wasn't specific for that type of car. So to some degree, it's quite a low-level class, and hey, here's how you interface with the different type of ignition systems you're going to run into out there. It's not necessarily specific to a fourth-gen Camaro LS1 engine.
Okay, well, yeah, but that's actually a pretty neat course because you got to have the stock ECU in,
right?
Like some of the stuff, like how to. And I mean, I realize the problem is that there's probably so many configurations of ECU versus car combination you run across that you can't teach everybody everything. But the basic principles there.
Well, and Subaru guy there had it right. I mean, if you don't, the reason the Subaru guys, you don't hear much about standalones on those is because they're able to do everything they need to with the stock computer. They've gotten in depth enough to the computer and figured out how all those factory algorithms work, and they're a lot more complicated than a standalone, like a Megasquirt or a Big Stuff. The factory computers are much more complicated. They're compensating for way more factors than your average aftermarket EFI system, which is needed for emissions compliance and longevity and all kinds of stuff, warranty. But no, basically, those guys don't really hear much about standalones because they have that covered. There's another, the extreme opposite of that would be completely rip out that factory computer like we do in a lot of street strip drag cars and just run whatever computer we choose. In the middle, like you said, it's kind of a gray area. You have the piggyback thing, which is not as popular now as it used to be, where they would hook up a device that would intercept incoming signals to the factory ECU in order to fool it into doing things it normally wouldn't do.
That's Mike's favorite.
Yeah, those things are finicky to deal with, but I usually will install a configuration instead of standalone, I call it standalong, where I'll have an extra computer in the car where it will drive just the injectors, for the fuel control, just the ignition system for spark and for timing, and maybe boost control or nitrous controls, things like that. But I will leave everything else to the factory computer, because if a guy wants his air conditioning and climate control to work and his factory gauges and all of that stuff, there are guys out there who will take a custom computer and make it do all of that stuff to talk to the factory dashes and things like that in some applications, but that gets very time consuming and expensive to do it that way. So what I usually do is someone says, hey, I want to do this. You know, actually Larry Larson had a customer that did this. He had a 2015 ZL1 Camaro. I mean, this is a nice car, right? And he bought it from the dealership and drove it 14 miles to Larry's shop, and they cut into that thing to turn it into a 7-second, you know, back half car. But they still wanted air conditioning, you know, power steering, everything else. That car ended up running a 7003 or something stupid, almost a 6-second pass at like 198 something. It didn't go 200 and it didn't go in the sixes, but it did it with, you know, OnStar and Bluetooth.
It still got AC. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, you see that, and that's what happened. All the new cars, the engine control computer of years ago is gone. It's a vehicle operations center, and it talks to all the different modules
of processors.
Yeah,
network of processors. There's maybe 8 to 10 computers on a network talking to each other, and if you pull one out, I mean, there was all kinds of stuff on that car. You know, if you pull one of those systems out, there was a fuel system control module, something in the back that it took 2 different fuel level sensors because it was a saddle-shaped tank in that car. I remember this. And it would take those and convert those to a message on a network, on a CAN bus network, and broadcast it over the network, and then the computer driving the gauges, I think the body control module, would pick that message up and give you the fuel level. Well, of course, Larry, he rips out the tank, the factory tank, and it's got a cell in the back, and he's like, Clark, I've got one of these JEGS fuel level sensors to figure out how to talk to, you know, this supercomputer network on the other end of the car, because by God, that fuel gauge has got to work, that factory Camaro. And I spent like 2 weeks on that.
Wow.
I had the guys from HP Tuners helped us and wrote some custom stuff for the factory modules, a couple of different things that helped all that integration work. But in the end, we got it all working.
See, I mean, from my side of this, I would have to think, and one guy on the chat, Jeff Chang, he said the McLaren has like 20,000 different maps in the computer. Now, if they've done all this work to make this thing as nice and as perfect and as drivable, and look, let's face it, probably no company out there, Holly included, could devote the research and development time into this that, say, GM or Ford or anybody else could. I would like to think that the factory computer could do a better job than all these. So what does it come down to? How far in the aftermarket tuners have been able to get into deciphering what GM does?
Partly that. The other part is, you know, as you really step up big power, you need bigger fuel injectors, right? Someone asked me to answer this question, what's the point of the big billet atomizer low impedance injectors? Real simple. They can flow 700 plus pounds per hour of fuel. Now, those injectors take much more current to drive. Well, the factory computer isn't equipped with the hardware to drive the circuit to drive that. You know, it's hilarious. I have. Hold on, I got to stop here real quick. On a piece of paper of things that rattle around in my brain, I have injector drivers, duty cycle, and I have big injectors. You know what to make them work. I have that on the piece of paper. So continue, Scott. You don't even need me. I can just sit here and just. You want me to come back at 8 o'clock? You know, I was sitting there in the green room listening to you guys warming up, and I'm like, holy shit, these guys have way better questions this time. I better be on point. So yeah, I actually had this about the drivers. So yeah, that's a good question because that people have. Well, the point there is there's physical reasons. There's some other things. Say you want your ECU to control a boost control solenoid. Well, the factory computer was never equipped with that on a GM, most GM engines, right? On almost all of them. So I mean, now it becomes a case of, do I fight this factory computer or I tune it? Will I add all these ancillary devices like the 2-step rev limiter? That's a separate box from Lingenfelter, or do I ditch all of that and have it all inside of one box, which from a tech support perspective is nice. So you got to think of all the stuff you're going to add. Now, truth be told, these factory ECU, there's guys tuning those up beyond 1,000 horsepower, and they're doing really well. You know, I'm not an expert at it. I'm really poor at doing that. But I've been told by Oh, guys that have raced them, especially, the bracket type racer guys, that they've said once you really start pushing the power with the factory computers, they start doing weirder things or being inconsistent with barometric changes, for example. Less consistent. I mean, I've had teams tell me, we switched out from GM computers to Holley for all of these NMCA cars that we raced, and they all got more consistent, if not faster. But, that was a big thing for them.
Yeah, and that's really an awful thing, because if you have something, that's really uncharted and not repeatable, how do you find that bug to know how to program around it? That would really suck. That would really suck.
Another reason to switch is you need high sampling rate or reasonable sample rate data to comb through. I mean, guys come to me with standalone computers that I helped install and say, hey, dude, it's doing something weird. And I'll tell them, I'm 1,000 miles away. Get me a data log of it doing the not weird, and then a data log of it doing the weird. We'll lay them over each other and see if the computer's commanding a difference. Is something in the tune making it do something wrong based on a certain input it's seeing, or is there something mechanical to look for in the car? Honestly, I'm doing a lot of remote tuning these days.
Really?
During the weekdays, I'm tons and tons of remote tuning. Yeah, it's interesting how that field is kind of expanding.
Well, I mean, to me, that was always a little, and again, my tuning experience was kind of stopped at the digital fuel injection stuff when it was a DFI, and then it was Excel DFI, and I mean, that's pretty much where I ended. And
that was a great system.
Oh yeah, in the beginning, it was easy.
That was the first box to win Engine Masters Challenge on EFI, and actually the first
really?
4 years that somebody with EFI won that event, it was with an old school Gen 7.
Yeah, and with a computer like that, I couldn't picture, and I mean, I guess probably the capabilities now, I couldn't picture in my mind trying to do a remote tune for somebody, because the data logging stuff you get is just not going to be good enough from that. It's just not. But I mean, again, years have gone by. I'm sure that what you can get now from a data log is insane.
Yeah. I mean, and a lot of it is just how many sensors are you willing to put into the ECU, which is another reason to go with, the Holley or the MS3 Pro or the standalone computer. Almost all of those come with extra inputs, so you can add things that you can't get on the factory computer, like a coolant pressure sensor, which is my favorite one. Or, transmission temperature or transmission line pressure if you're doing the dump valve thing. There's all kinds of tricks you can do so I'm a fan of doing the custom standalone computer. There is a downside to that, though. I'm surprised no one has mentioned yet. None of you guys have caught the obvious downside to the standalone computer?
Which?
No one?
I have crickets.
It's not installed for you. You got your Subaru, you buy a thing in the mail, and you plug it into your car, and you start going right off the OBD port. You don't have to spend 2 days trying to get the car to start.
But isn't that why people like you are out there? I mean,
it is. But my whole thing is I can't take care of the whole world, and I can't imagine people with even a fun project car that they're just not tuning it or taking care of it themselves.
Yeah, and I agree with you, because anything that you are going to be involved with, if you don't understand it, when it breaks, you can't fix it, and things break. Things need attention. So I completely agree with that. But this is, and I'm not afraid to jump into any of this stuff. I'm sure that, it's all, look, I've always said this, if you give me enough time, I'll build the space shuttle. I might be 150, yeah. but I'll build it.
No, that's the perfect segue. I was just sitting here. The thing I was waiting to say next was, you can pay the best tuner in the world $1,000 a day to come out and set up your car and go make the first couple hits at the track, right? And maybe you pay 2 days for $2,000. That guy can't do nearly as good as a complete amateur can over, say, 40 or 60 or 80 hours.
Right.
Especially if he gets himself a little bit of education. And I'd have guys go to my class tell me, oh, well, I'm not here to become a super tuner. I just want to, number one, get it running for my guy so that it's ready at the dyno and we're not fixing stupid stuff I can fix in my garage. And number two, I want to know what he's doing and how it works. And then number three, when he's done, I'm going to take over the tuning at the track and make the fine adjustments.
See, part of this probably comes in where your prerequisites end. Like if you're trying to make where do you start? Like everybody knows, okay, sensors are going to work like maybe 0 to 5 volt, and the different varieties of wave sensors and triggers, Hall effect units, everything can work. You need to have I guess the term would be the base level electronics understanding to start to do things like maybe to tie some of these computers together, like to make piggybacks work. Yeah. And that's probably where people are going to get screwed up more than anything.
That's correct. What I've done there, I mean, there are schools, you guys talk to the EFI University guy, he has a really good school on, like, they cover tons and tons and tons of material. What I tried to do was place myself, hey, I want to be at the very entry level with these guys, and I want to say, hey, listen, here's the low-hanging fruit. Here's the stuff you should worry about first. Because, man, we could spend all day on injector characterization, but if your crank sensor isn't working right and you have it wired backwards, it doesn't matter because you're never going to get to the injectors firing. So I try to help people prioritize that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot, and I tell them, hey, I'm not covering this because it's not the most important thing in the world yet, but you'll get there. The goal here is to get you up and running and driving and tuning without, spending months and months of frustration, and do it as quick as possible. And obviously, one of you guys better come to my class.
Yeah, I'm for sure going to go because, I mean, and Tad, you ain't got nothing to do. You got less life than anybody I know. You got to be able to make it.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there might be a whole new world of fast food places down here you ain't never heard of, Tad. There's all kinds of shit. Now, I'm definitely going to get down there for sure. I mean, we'll talk about it and tell me when and how and everything. We'll get that squared away. That's perfect.
Sure. And
I mean, if Tad wants to go, and maybe Fudd would want to go, he's gonna. But I mean, this is something that a lot of people. What it comes down to is, if you're interested in this stuff, you should go. So it's not quite the mysterious thing that it seems to be right now.
Price it costs about as much as a dyno session would cost, right? And only this time you're there, and someone's explaining to you how to do it and what's going on. And I go through a pretty great effort to make sure people see and feel what's going on. I mean, we're in the room with the car on the dyno. I have a connection to the computer, but I have a pair of projectors and big screens so you can see what I'm doing, and then I'm speaking through the PA, making sure that everybody can hear. And we stop when they have questions. My whole second day is based around, we'll make a pull on the car, make an adjustment. While it's cooling down, let's spend 30 minutes talking about a technical topic, pick a topic. And, usually it's boost control or traction control, that kind of stuff, or tell us about so-and-so's car, that you worked on.
And what's the cost of this thing? What does it cost?
The one at Fonts Performance, it's $550 for 2 days.
Mm-hmm.
It goes from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. on Saturday and Sunday, which is March the 4th and the 5th.
Okay. Hope everybody got that, and we'll make sure that that's up on our Facebook page as well, so everybody's got that.
Post the links.
Yep.
I'd write it down, except
I don't even have the website yet. I just have a Facebook page, and right now that's the Real Tuners Facebook page.
Yep.
Or you can just hit me up, Scott Clark, but all the info is on there.
All right. Perfect. All right, well, let's get into some of these other things, and some of these.
Let's
go ahead.
Get back to the E85 question. How about the flex fuel?
That's where I was going to go.
I didn't want to forget that one. I'm sorry. Before we move along, but so two different things. I mean, so if you're a factory guy, I mean, you may have a car that already was E85 compatible, or you may be using a computer that has that capability because certain cars in that family have flex fuel capabilities.
Well, here's what part of this is, and I don't mean to derail this, but part of the conversation has to be had that I think the regional availability of E85, where it is, where it isn't, because here in New Jersey, I mean, and I know there's, and actually Fonz is on, he's actually on the chat room. I don't know. I have never personally come across a gas station where there's been E85. And I've looked to see, being a performance-minded guy, because some of the Circle Track guys are even using the stuff. And like around here, I don't think you see a lot of flex fuel vehicles.
No.
So I
see a lot of cars, but where are they using it?
Yeah, but I mean, it's exactly because here you would never run across it. So I don't know how, because I live in New Jersey and I don't travel except to like trade shows. I don't see anything. I don't know how prevalent E85 is across the country. So
in the Midwest where I'm at, it's at every single pump, there a gas station.
Gotcha. All right, so it's ready. I mean, it's there.
Yeah.
We don't have it.
Well, I am not, again, Strader and those guys are the ones that give you the whole lecture on the oxygen content and all the engineering details. But for me, I mean, it goes something like this. You have a simple content sensor and it puts out a range. The old ones were 0 to 5 volts, just like you were talking about. The new ones are frequency. But it's the same thing. They have a linear range, low to high, that's just, the oxygen content. And the computer doesn't care if it's oxygen content or if it's how many hot dogs I ate for lunch. It just knows there's a low and a high and a number and a something in between these 2 points. Usually how you tune it is you start off with either completely gasoline or completely, E98 or E85 or both, and you'll do a tune for each of those, and those will be your extreme ends. So your ignition timing, you're probably going to want on the typical LS like 1.5 degrees more timing at wide open throttle for the E85 versus the gasoline, the pump gas tune, or maybe less because it's an 87 octane tune and you're being safe. Well, you tell the computer, hey, look, here's the extreme end. This is the map for E85, and then here's the timing map for gasoline, for pump gas. Now blend between those two using that input that's given me, somewhere between, no ethanol and completely ethanol. And so it's a blending thing. There's kind of an art form to it.
Yeah, I was just going to ask because that can't be necessarily a linear change from low to higher. Yeah,
exactly. So they say it's said, and I've seen things to kind of confirm this, but anything above E45 or E50 has the same detonation resistance as you go up towards E98, but the stoic value still changes linearly. So there's a couple of different properties that are not only nonlinear, but that don't follow each other.
Right. So you get to the point where you've kind of done all the help you can have in what we're talking about with detonation resistance. But then the other things like, of course, air fuel is going to change as that continues to rise up. That's interesting.
Sure. There's a couple different ways to deal on that. Simpler systems rely on their O2 sensors to make that up minor, the compensation for that. And others you program and handle it really well. You mentioned the Pro EFI. I know that is really an OEM grade system that Jason Siebels and all those guys took and turned into a really good motorsports ECU. Like anything else with lots of features, it's more complicated, but that's okay by somebody like me. That's a system I can use, and they have amazing flex fuel strategies that work really well. There's a number of different ways of doing it. Some systems just have a fuel offset by a percentage, and others get more elaborate, and you can blend different, like the MS3 Pro is an interesting one. You can blend your boost tables. You can say, hey, depending on my ethanol content, limit my peak boost if I'm controlling boost from a turbocharger.
I think this guy's got to have, he's tapped into my webcam on the Mac or some shit, because I just wrote down boost reference with 85 content. Jesus Christ.
There you go. Sorry, man. I'm just...
No, it's good. It's good because it's all the shit I was going to ask, so it's perfect. Obviously, because of the detonation resistance, it comes up, like you said, to 45 or 50, and then it kind of stabilizes. Does that stabilize in the boost environment as well? In other words, are they more boost tolerant when you go from 45 to 50 to 80 to 98? I mean,
well, the way I look at it is whatever factors contribute to pushing the edge of unstable combustion. Because I don't even like to use the term knock. Mm-hmm. I've been around some OEM projects where I was like the junior guy in the room, and enough to know that there's at least 4 or 5 different things, everything from combustion chamber design that can affect it to the heat range of the spark plug. There's too much timing to cause knock. Lighten the mix too early or unstable. I'm just going to call it unstable combustion, when it's hitting its peak pressure at the time you don't want.
And there we go back to those mythical cylinder pressure gauges that we talked about the last time.
Spark plugs.
Yeah, I have a TFX8. I mean, I've actually done combustion pressure analysis and seen this stuff.
Nice.
One of the projects I worked on was characterizing knock sensors for a marine application. It was pretty cool, but way too nerdy for this call.
Yeah.
But really, so more boost, you get closer, to that theoretical detonation limit. Lesser quality fuel without changing boost, same thing. More spark timing, keep putting timing in it, even though you're not picking up any torque. That means you're moving that combustion center, earlier in the cycle. It gets to the point where it's like trying to run downstairs with your knees locked. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Just really bad on the parts and the rotating assembly. So there's a whole bunch of factors when you're tuning these things. When someone says, hey, I got this junkyard LS and I want to make 1,300 horsepower and I want it to live. But
live how long?
Well, it just seems like all of this put together, there's specifically with the 85 stuff, because, questions just come up like when you're thinking, you're just sitting there thinking, well, how does that work? Because like, I understand that with E85, and I think about it more here because it's not available here. If somebody had built and tuned and used a flex sensor to specifically work with E85, you would never know what kind of mixture you have in the tank. So to me, that E85 or that flex fuel tunability would be extremely important if I was trying to do this, because like for me,
it is.
And again, I don't know, like you said, where you are, it's everywhere. Out here, it's nowhere. I don't know what it's like in Pennsylvania. I haven't seen it. Have you, Tad? You've been around places in there.
Actually, no. It's like all the places I go to, I'm either getting diesel, so I'm not even looking for that stuff.
Yeah.
Or,
where you guys live, the money thing to do is to buy it in barrels of E98
Yeah.
and cut it yourself with race gas.
Yeah.
And that makes a really good, consistent fuel that you can store and last a long time. My big gripe about all the fancy oxygenated race gasolines, Q16, Q whatever, is that those things, as soon as you crack the barrel, those things are a moving target. And I've had so many where I cracked the barrel and got a horrible, something was wrong with the fuel chemistry, and this engine black smokes like a diesel rolling coal, but the O2s don't read right, it doesn't make power. So
we talked about exactly that during one of the episodes back, because we got a drum of, back then it was C44. And we would take, 3 or 4 gallons out at a time, dyno test, make sure that it was, that the motor was good. Everything was right with the motor with that fuel, give it to the super stock guys. And then we started seeing less and less coming from this fuel, and we had only used like half of it. And that stuff was always so touchy. It was insane. So yeah, I can understand that.
So I mean, E98 plus cut it yourself, and that can make darn near methanol performance in a fuel that's nice and stable and affordable and can still be kind of used on the street, because it's not, it falls right in the middle of gasoline and methanol as far as the fuel quantity you have to be able to pump.
I think we have one person that's going to be listening to this.
Yeah. Well, it's the right thing to do.
Right.
I mean, to use this kind of fuel, that unlocks a ton of performance potential that you just couldn't have with gasoline without going, and even with racing gasoline, I would argue that it's tough to simulate what you can get from methanol and methanol-based fuels.
Yeah, but like everybody else says, but it smells good.
I don't mind the smell at all.
Like French fries.
I've never smelled the 85. Is that what it smells like?
That's what it's supposed to smell like, yeah.
Really?
But it smells like a French fryer when you're done. Yeah, if you've got it dialed in just right.
Wow, it's kind of strange.
Which would make you think I'd want it, but
yeah, of all things.
Properties. It's a lot like methanol. You guys know this, that methanol engines are easy to tune because you just pour all the fuel in and then back it off until there's less coming out the exhaust wet. E85 has those properties, but you can also start an E85 car at 0 degrees Fahrenheit outside temp if you know how to do it. I mean, it'll work. The OEMs do it. The flexible cars all start up in the cold just fine. But yeah, so it's got a lot of interesting properties. Just from my perspective, and I'm not a fuel chemist, I could be totally saying the wrong thing or whatever. I'm just, from what I've observed out in the field, using it lots. And I'd say, of the street cars I do, probably 60 or 70% of them are street driven, and almost all of those will run E85 in some capacity or another.
Well, I mean, I back to what I was saying, I would have to think that anything that's, a boost vehicle, the benefits from that is, that I don't see how you could really ask for the stability that you could with racing gasolines. And I mean, I'm sure you can get there, but I mean, the cost too is tremendous. It's not a joke.
Oh, it's super cheap. Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's talk about your friend. You had talked about the atomizer injectors. So let's get into the injector driver. Let's get into, and this might be a little more technical for some of the people, but where do you get into an injector bad area as these injectors get bigger? Like, what duty cycle can you tolerate? Like, because a duty cycle, what I guess the way that I'm trying to properly phrase this is there's a bottom and a top. You can't open it in a brief period of time and close it, and you can't open it and close it in the period of time. So you always have time.
Yeah. So first off, before I get into my thoughts on that, you guys need to talk to, and I'll message you this. You need to talk to Jack French at Bill Atomizer. He's awesome. And then you need to talk to Tom Sewell at Fuel Injector Development. Those are two guys. One of them, Jack French, is like the 500-pound an hour and up injector guy, and Tom Sewell is the everything Bosch OEM style injector, which is kind of like 350 pounds per hour and down.
Mm-hmm.
But at least in my world, there's some overlap there. But anyway, those are two really good guys that would be a great interview. Here's the thing. Duty cycle is just how long per combustion event is that, or per engine cycle for each cylinder, how long is that injector open? So if that injector is 100% duty cycle, it's just locked open the whole time. There's a couple of different things you got to be concerned about there. Number one is, can your injector drivers on your ECU support the current that those big monster heavy injectors with lots of heavy internal moving parts, can it support the current that you need to be able to drive? I mean, some computers have problems with that. Some of them just won't even open that injector. But that's the first concern. But you're talking about, I mean, what you were getting at was performance. You know, there's a low minimum I can open that injector, and then there's a maximum that I should avoid. Well, and most of the big ones, we'll start with the maximum. There's, your biggest concern is where it stops delivering fuel while you're still increasing duty cycle. And that's anywhere from like 85% that I've seen. On some of them are all the way good up to 95 and 100%. They have a linear delivery from, say, 50% duty cycle all the way up. Now
that's essentially, it would be, I guess the best way to term it, to understand it, would be valve float, that you can't open and close. You lose control of opening and closing accurately in the time frame you have, correct?
Not really. Well, yes and no. If you have problems with your injector drivers, the whole point of the injector drivers are to manage both the peak current, which is to get that thing open, and then the hold current, which is to hold it open.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's kind of two things you look at there. I'm not really the injector guru, but I actually did help the fuel tech guys develop their injector driver. It was one of those things where I was here in the States running a bench with an oscilloscope and an inductive clamp and showing them currents of the different injectors that were out there, a set of Precisions, a set of Morans, a set of billet atomizers. And then, they would make changes to their hardware design. So there's a lot to it, to the hardware design, because I know in the race cars and the pro mod world, it's a common problem to burn an injector driver out.
Well, I mean, the pictures of the nozzles I've seen, they're looking like they got damn near solenoid starter coils on them. I mean, they're...
Correct.
It's ridiculous.
Like a nitrous solenoid. Exactly. Now, the billet atomizer ones are back to everything's internal. It's not that external side firing thing that you saw for a while. But that's, you guys, you need to have Jack on and have him talk about it for a while, because that guy's super cool. I tested a couple of his early billet atomizers when I was working with the Proline and the Fuel Tech guys, and it was just neat talking to him. I know he would make a good interview and explain some of this stuff on the big injectors.
Okay, and I mean, that's certainly somebody we'd like to talk to, but we
something you did bring up, though, as a tuner's perspective, the minimum open time. So let's say one of those injectors in your application, and it changes from car to car, even if you have the same injectors. It can be based partly on what ECU you're using, and also what voltage you run the injectors at, right? So an injector running at 16 or 20 or 24 volts, if it can, will open and close a lot quicker and a lot more snappy and have less dead time, less time spent opening or closing, than something that's running at 12 volts.
Yeah, hold up a second. Yeah, hold up a second. Do these computers actually drive do they have like a step up in voltage to drive the injectors now?
No, none that I've seen, but it's one of those, got to be careful. Don't want to give anybody secrets.
Well, the only reason I'm bringing that up is because as the proud owner of a 7.3 diesel truck that has shit falling off it as it sits in the driveway.
Injector drivers.
Yeah, that has a driver box. And I mean, when that thing burned up, it burned up. I mean, and after a little bit of research, you can buy hot rodded ones that instead of 110 volts, they're 120 volts or 140 volts. Right. And I'm like, whoa.
Right. Yeah, similar deal, to reduce the dead time, make those injectors move with more authority. Now maybe that's harder on the injectors. It's kind of like a valve train situation. You change one thing and you might affect something else. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of dynamics to it electronically and electromechanically, like a valve train thing. It's not, if you're bending push rods, stiffer and heavier push rods may not necessarily be the answer.
Yeah, it's not really the problem. You have to address it. I got it.
Yeah. You got to have Tom Vigue on here too. He's the Spintron guru, but he's another one to talk to you about valve train stuff. Anyway, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of factors to it, but I mean, as far as the tuning goes, those injectors at the bottom end can only inject so much fuel. So at their minimum open time, or so little fuel, let's say, you can't, maybe your engine wants to idle on, zero point 0.6 milliseconds of open time of the injectors, but the particular injector you have, the minimum open time is 1 millisecond. You can't get any less than that, otherwise it just stops opening altogether.
Yeah, and that's kind of why I was referencing valve float, even though it's not like we all know valve float is really bounce. But what we had happen is the Penta would try to open, and it's partway open and saying, "Hey, turn around, close," and you have no control.
Right. So that's what happens. You have no control. Now, today's injectors, I mean, I really like the Bosch stuff. The fuel injector development, Dietz Works, Injector Dynamics sells these. They have some of their own custom ones that are pretty cool. I like those injectors for up to 210 pounds per hour will support some pretty big power. I mean, what is that, like 2,600 horse on gasoline or 2,800, something like that, for 8 of those injectors. But so I mean that's pretty good, and you cut that in half or more for methanol. But you've got concerns about, can the injectors support that type of fuel you're running too. There's just a lot of things to be concerned about. But really, most modern stuff, if you're going to run the 700-pound build atomizers, you're probably already on alcohol. So you don't mind it running super rich at idle because it's just got to warm up enough to get staged and do a burnout.
Mm-hmm.
So things have kind of, in the industry today, it's pretty easy to get a hold of one of your major injector suppliers and have them steer you in the right direction for what you want to do. Just be realistic about what you want to do.
Sure. Now, wait, that brings up another, because again, back when, to give you an idea, when I left the DFI side, the sequential stuff just started to come out. So what I was involved with was batch fire. So obviously that totally screwed up any amount of idle fuel characteristics. It made your injector selection that much more difficult because you were firing all the injectors, and it was much harder deal to work with. Now, when
it is and it isn't. It's funny how well those engines actually ran for the batch fire. I had guys arguing with me, "Oh, sequential was so much better," blah blah blah. And I'm like, man, if you think about this, at idle, there's some big differences with sequential. But if your injectors are open 85% of the time at wide open throttle, then what's the difference?
Yeah, it was kind of
the intake valve was only open 25% of the time.
Sure. It was kind of characteristics of drivability and niceness and idle and cold start and how well you could control like the finer points. But yeah, when you're on the throttle, it's kind of, that's it. It's gone. Like constant flow. Sure. Same thing. Constant flows don't shut off. And you look at every sprint car, they make an awful lot of power.
Oh, who was the first car to have that back then? The Grand National with the sequential?
Yeah, I think Grand Nationals were actually sequential.
Yeah, they're SFI.
But I'm sure look, I can't imagine GM was on the cutting edge of electronics.
Well, they might have been for emissions reasons back then, but
they were, man. Some of that stuff was pretty cool because some of the other neat things going on with that engine was the distributorless ignition.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. So they were getting into crank triggers and things like that right about that era. That was a neat little car right there. That and the if you follow my Facebook, I got to work on that General Motors LT5 that Lotus worked on.
Ooh, nice.
Lotus helped design. I got called in to help tune the 25th anniversary. They built one of the prototype Gen 2 versions of that engine that never made it production. That was pretty cool, but they had a lot of neat stuff going on back then. Distributorless ignitions, crankshaft and camshaft triggers, staged injection, so GM actually, I wouldn't poke fun for the time. They were doing some pretty cool stuff. And if you're working with guys from Lotus, and Lotus, the guy from Lotus told me that, hey, GM's computer was awesome. It was great at the time. We used it. I would think on that ZR1C4 Corvette would have had something fancier on it had it not been good enough.
Yeah, I would have thought that, like, with the availability of the stuff from F1 guys, and like Jeff Chang's ears will perk up on this one, like the McLaren people, I would think that like some of the management equipment that could have been out there conceivably compared to a manufacturer. I mean, again, I'm a GM guy. I am. I make fun of Ford guys constantly.
But you're driving one, geez, but
I know, and it's falling apart in the driveway as we sit here. But you would think that GM would not necessarily be representative of the cutting edge at any point in time. But but yeah, I guess, I don't know. I mean, I would have to think that Formula One guys, unless they just weren't giving those secrets up.
No.
And this was just the best that was around at that time. But yeah, it is pretty impressive that, Lotus was involved with that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's the OEMs, technologically speaking, that's some of the highest tech computers out there. I mean, what's sitting in your driveway falling apart has definitely a more complicated control system than what's driving around, the IndyCar races and things like that. I wanted to say more complex than Formula One, but man, they're doing some pretty crazy stuff right now. But control-wise, but with that factory computer, there's a lot of things going on that you just don't worry about in your street stripped car.
True.
You got to think about the guys that design the tunes for those. Here's the deal. They're not like me. I can sit down and with every car I work on, I get to spend time with it until it's right and then send it on its way. Well, dude, that calibrator at GM, the Greg Banish guy has to be told, listen, we're going to build 400,000 copies of this engine, and you need to give me a file that I can put on every ECU, and you can never touch it and test it and see if it's going to work right. Seems funny, but any tuner will tell you you can have two identical cars come into the shop with two identical everything ECU and still have completely different tunes and make 30 different horsepower from each other, and just don't know why. Tolerance stacking, a bunch of little things that add up. So the reason to admire those factory tuners, a lot of people, I'm kind of a shit starter on social media often, sometimes, whatever. And I've, gotten in it with some of these factory computer guys, but the truth is, massive respect to the guys that work at the GM and the Ford that do these calibrations, because, man, they're looking at so many more requirements on the list of shit they have to accomplish, than we even realize. It bugs me every time I hear somebody at a serviceman say, "Oh, the damn engineers designed this thing. I could do it better than they did," and blah blah blah. No, you can't.
No, you can't.
There's so much more going on. I've been around some OEM design guys, and I never thought about the fact that you can't have a super kick-ass intake manifold because the shipping weight, makes a good intake manifold too expensive. The shipping costs are going to kill it. Well, shit, you never think about that. But
yeah.
Stuff like that.
No, that's true. And we used to have the circle track guys or the street guys come in, because real race guys had crank triggers and they'd want an Excel dual point distributor. And my father would be like, why? and they're like, GM has a perfectly working unit that's great. This isn't good. Because, they're triggering MSD bucks. So you don't need a dual point distributor. But the amount of things that the automotive manufacturers get right, stupid shit, elastometer style dampers. We can go down a list of things that just work great from the manufacturers.
Oh yeah, for sure. You got to respect what those guys are doing. So I always try to, a lot of these guys will take their factory car and just rip it apart and throw all this stuff out. I'm like, man, you should really look at what they decided to do, because, you're spending $400 with me today to calibrate your car. GM probably spent $400 million.
Yeah.
On the one that's sitting in your driveway. There's something there.
And has to start in all temperatures, get through an entire warranty period. Yep. Oh, yeah. We can go down a list of shit it's got to do.
You guys see on my Facebook page, the guy, my buddy in Fargo, all my northern half of the country buddies, this is the time of year where you park your EFI car outside and you do your cold start testing. It's pretty funny how these videos are popping. This guy started one up and the coolant temperature is like -17 or some shit. Oh.
That's funny, because that was one of the things that, when I was doing and I did very few street cars, a couple Corvettes, a couple things from using, and I talked about it before, the Dan White adapter harness that jumped. They're still sitting over there in the chair when I took pictures of them. If you did it in the summer, I don't have a big giant refrigerator. You can't, there's no way to simulate that unless it gets cold.
Right.
That's right.
So you'd have to tell people, say, look, when it gets balls cold, you got to come here. We got to leave it outside. We got to let it get ice cold, and then we got to figure it out. And
do a base tune then, yeah.
Yeah, that's what you had to do.
And that's how it works. And those street car guys expect it to work, especially the Corvette guys, man. If it doesn't drive like a proper street car, problems. I did that one LT5, that oddball 32 valve V8 GM motor for the guys at Lingenfelter. And I lucked into that job. That place is full of brilliant tuners, right? Like Graham Bean, Brent Malone, Jason Haynes, all these guys. Chris Beischer works there. Just lots of really smart guys, but no one wanted to screw with that car because it was old and weird electronics. And of course, the Megasport stuff worked perfectly with it, and there were some ZR1 guys running it. So anyway, I helped them out with that project, but I was kind of nervous because, where's this car going after we're done here? Oh, it's going to these automotive journalists. They're going to go flog on it and write articles about it, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, oh, shit, if this thing doesn't start up when it's cold just right, or, anything like that, you really stress that it ends up being perfect. And, of course, I was back there a few weeks ago, and I was like, how did it go? This was a year ago. How did that car run? And he's like, well, those articles coming out. I'm like, well, how did it turn out? Well, I guess you get to read the article. It's like, oh, great. Nobody called and complained, so it must have worked okay.
Must have been okay. All right. I'm trying, you hit like everything on my paper. like the things that I had actually written down. We talked about injectors, about drivers,
The flex fuel.
And we.
Let me tell you one other thing about the flex fuel sensor we missed. The
Sure.
Continental sensor, the new ones, the GM ones. This is something that guys that are listening to this, you need to pay more attention to, is your fuel temperature. And those cheap little Continental sensors also output fuel temperature.
Really?
People forget that they're not just quantity, they actually put out the fuel temperature, and that is almost more handy info to have for your street car than the actual content of the fuel, in my opinion. I have guys installing that just to monitor temperature. Guys that run on this drag week event and the Rocky Mountain Race Week, guys that are going to have to take their race cars on the highway for 6 hours at a time. Your fuel tends to heat up when you run those big high-zoot electric pumps.
Okay. Well, question. What happens, like, let's say you have E50 content at 50 degrees or E50 content at 90 degrees? What would change if you were not monitoring temperature?
That's a Tom Sewell question. I would get on the phone and ask him is how I would answer that question.
Okay.
Honestly, I'm not sure what properties actually changed. For me in the tune, I'm never close to the ragged edge enough that I have to worry too much about extreme little details like that, But that's something on the order of what does humidity change for a pro stock engine,
Yeah.
At the fine edge, there's something you're going to want to change. Burn rate's going to be affected. I know that. Oh, the flow, the temperature, the fuel changes the actual mass delivered for a given amount of pulse time on the injector.
That's true.
That changes a little bit.
That's true.
But
And
very on the order of very small details that an OEM guy would care about, but a race car guy would be just like, fuck it, turn up the boost another 2 pounds and won't worry about it.
yeah. See, I'd like everything to be perfect all the time. I'd like to micromanage every aspect if I could. And, a sensor that does, that actually monitors temperature makes much more sense to me.
Yeah.
I mean, we did it on dynos. Why wouldn't you do it
on your vehicle?
On your vehicle. Sure. All right. Perfect. Wonder, I'm looking at the chat room and there was all kinds of stuff. And
no way. I'm not looking at that right now, but whatever questions. I mean, if you want to play Stump the EFI guy for a while, we can do that.
Let's see if anybody wants to call 908-751-0211.
They'll never call.
I do have the phone system open, so I won't end up hanging up on anybody this time. I'm ready to go. So yeah, if anybody's got any questions for Scott, give a call in. We'll stay on for a little bit. Let's see. There was one guy in there that said that he's got a notepad out. I think it was Luke. Said he had a notepad out, but he didn't hear what he wanted yet. Well, are your fingers broke, Luke?
Go away, Luke. I'm logged in now. I can see the question.
I didn't see any actual questions. I think people were just listening.
Oh, I like it. Now the questions have stopped.
Yeah, that's right.
Gordon Dawson is in here. He's building a pro mod on the West Coast. There's a couple of guys who are lurking, but who aren't really talking.
Figures.
He doesn't want you to know what he's working on. Pro mod.
That's why I said, why do I announce the phone number? Nobody's ever going to call.
And it's weird because like the people in the chat room, they talk amongst themselves and listen to us.
Yeah.
But I mean, they do pay attention. I mean, we got good listeners, and I appreciate every one of them.
You have a really good crowd. This is a pretty cool podcast. Plus, you guys have like good audio. I'm just the other podcasts sound like they were recorded with a potato.
Yeah.
My favorite thing about this is somebody spent some time to make this one sound good.
I'll tell you what.
That's what I've been saying.
I think that's. I mean, I know it's stupid, but I enjoyed the shit out of putting this together.
He did.
I told you I'm a hobby audio guy, right? I used to help set up like project recording studios and recording rooms, and I've been a musician and drummer most of my life.
Well, you know what's going to happen? You're going to come in here, and I'm going to show you, because this is one of those things that when you don't know what you're doing, you might be able to get from point A to point B, but there really might have been a better path. So when you look at some of the audio stuff, you're going to be like, dude, what are you, high?
No, man. As long as it sounds good, it's like guys arguing about which ECU to choose. It's like, hey, man, the end result is all that matters. Again, it doesn't matter if it's a speaking spell or if it's a cell phone, as long as it's working good. All
right. Well, now we do have questions coming across on the chat room. So let's start with the first one that I saw. Looks like Tony, R85. Hobbyist interested in combustion pressure analysis. Whose instrumentation is the best?
Well, the systems I've seen are using the same actual instrumentation, right? The Kistler sensors, and then the systems I've used, which just there's just a couple of them. I've used the TFX is the one that I have and have used at a couple of different tier 2 OEM type things like a stationary engines and a couple of marine engine projects. But mostly the instrumentation is the same sensors.
Gotcha.
Or Optrand, and it's the way you put them in the engine that matters. Now, Jason at Lingenfelter, and I don't know if he's listening, but he tells me that there are combustion pressure sensors that are cheaper and longer lasting.
Okay.
Than the expensive $400 and $500 and $600 a unit ones. That I guess, like he said, the Audi diesel guys, there's some OEM engines as well as some race engines that run real-time combustion pressure monitoring, and they actually compensate their injection and timing based on that. So I guess there's big improvements being made in that area in the last few years as we speak. But
well, as their TDI car ran, my God.
Yeah, that car. So
he
told me that had been using those, and that somebody overseas has a OEM car that they're actually in production with. But I don't know much about that level. But the ones I use, TFX will sell you a system where, you can either go ahead and machine the head to put pressure sensors in. You want to put one in the chamber, and then you want to put one, at a certain distance before the intake valve and a certain distance after the exhaust valve, so you can measure the port pressures as well, right? Because a big part of scavenging is managing the timing of your port pressures.
Sure. Approximate cost per cylinder? Is that how they do it?
I think the guys had a one-channel system with a logger, $6,000 or $7,000 or $8,000 retail.
Okay.
Could you put together your own stuff a little bit cheaper? Yeah, probably. You could probably use a do-it-yourself logger. The ECU that has to do the logging. But I wouldn't know the benefits. It was hard enough for me to get used to using it. There's a lot of things that have to be right on the engine before you can even stick it in there.
Yeah.
And I was going to go into some of the other sensors. We had a deal that was the TFX made that was like a brass spark plug, and it had the guts of a spark plug in it, but shifted over to the side a little bit, and right next to it they machined in one of those skinny little pressure sensors.
Mm-hmm.
So it, and that was the way we could go out in the field and pop this in one of the cylinders or move it around to one at a time. One of the things you have to have is a high resolution crankshaft position indicator of some kind, right? The more teeth count on the wheels, the better, so the computer knows more accurately where that's at as it's measuring the pressure.
Right, resolution as to where it's happening, sure.
Yep.
All right, I actually lied to you. Luke had the first question. I don't know if you can actually answer this, but like base settings for putting a cam moving away from a stock map, I guess probably the only way to really answer that, I guess, is what the general trend would be, moving more the direction of a performance cam.
Too bad we're not on a webcast. I could show you in a picture. I do this in my class. But so think about this, man. You guys are airflow and engine guys. What does a cam do? It trades efficiency in one part of the RPM and load range. It trades efficiency to give you more in another. So you typically at the cam, it's very hard to improve average horsepower, but you can shift the peaks around quite a bit. So you have more peak in a narrower RPM range, for example. You might kill 100 horsepower at 2,500 RPMs, but you might pick up 100 horsepower at 7,500 RPMs. That's kind of your typical cam thing.
Yep.
Well, most ECUs use volumetric efficiency tables, at least the speed density ones that I'm working with. So what typically changes is around your idle area, they're going to idle with less vacuum, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that means that dot's going to move up on the table at idle. And it's going to be in an area, and it's going to want less fuel there because it's less efficient. There's less trapped air moving through the cylinder to burn. So typically, you're going to see the big change is you're going to see a VE table that's lower in efficiency outside of your power band areas and higher numbers or higher fuel numbers or higher efficiency inside your power band. And you know what I'm talking about on the DFI. There's a table there where going up and down is your manifold pressure or vacuum, and going across is RPM. And that's just a spreadsheet where the computer looks and says, hey, for this given RPM and manifold pressure that I'm at right now, how much fuel did the tuner say to put in here?
Yep.
Well, that table is going to be your most significant change. And then, there's going to be some timing changes, too.
So pretty much the fueling would follow the horsepower.
Well, you got to imagine
the power.
With all the cars with variable cams now, it's going to put that much more in there.
Correct. A better cam's going to trap more air. If you work with an Engine Masters Challenge guys like a Tony Bischoff or a John Kazi, their engines, you can see on the computer knows what the displacement of each cylinder is. So it knows, especially on a naturally aspirated engine, at atmospheric pressure, it knows exactly how much mass of air is going to go in there. Well, when you start tweaking exhaust and cam and intake properties to where you're actually trapping more than 100% fill, I get, and honestly, those guys are going to argue with me 100% is 100% because it's by volume, but you end up getting more mass per that volume.
Right.
You're almost like adding a pound of boost, if you will. But the pro stock cars going down the track are almost 2 pounds, it's almost 2 psi, positive manifold pressure. Of course, that's from the aerodynamics. That was a bad example. But you can optimize a naturally aspirated engine to get beyond 100% VE. And I have seen some Engine Masters engines I tuned cranking 115% VE.
Mm-hmm. Yep,
So
absolutely.
they were such well-tuned exhaust. And so, what's cool about the computer is it's telling you what the volumetric efficiency of that engine is,
Okay. Quick, here's one from a guy. What is the preferred process in steps for coordinating a remote tune? That's actually a pretty good one.
Well, that is a really good question because I just really started doing this last 6 months. People hit me up with that same question. Hey, how do I get started to be ready?
At any point in time, you could say, look, if you come to my school, I'll answer that question for you.
I was thinking that. I was like, well, first off, get educated. But no, it's not that big of a deal. It's really... It's funny. You're going to spend most of your time, if you bought a Holley right out of the box, and maybe that's a bad example because their systems are built really well to just plug in and go. They come with good bass tunes, and there's. But if you buy X brand standalone and go home and plunk it on your LS that you're putting the turbo system on, you're going to spend way more time getting that thing to start and idle than you're going to spend on the dyno tuning it. So I tell people the remote tuning, the best use of my time as a consultant to your project. Is probably right at the beginning for the testing and the configuration. Make sure you got it set up right. I don't want you to call me and have to push off our tuning appointment because you broke the ring gear, trying to start the engine with the plug wires hooked up. That kind of stuff. Hey man, don't laugh. That happens like 50% of the time. Something like that happens that just causes a big delay.
I know. So. Listen, I think on this podcast at one point I told a story about a circle track guy that set his ignition timing and he went through like 7 starters trying to get his motor. He kept breaking starters. Yeah. You got so much compression. Well, he did the timing light deal, set the light on 36 and the damper on 36, and he was starting a motor with 72.
Nice.
So yeah, that's shit that happens.
So I tell people your money might be better spent having guys. There are guys that specialize just in the first startup. There's a Holley guy, Carlos Vasquez. He's a real good guy that will, if you got a Holley for $200, call him and he'll give you the bass tune for your combo. He'll get on the phone with you, wow you, and he'll do TeamViewer to get the thing running, tell you what to test, okay, make sure all your inputs are working, go fire the car, get it started running, take it to the dyno, and he'll get you ready to go. And that's, to me, man, it's worth spending some money on remote configuration almost more than the tuning. The tuning part's easy.
Yep, got it. Okay. 3 more questions. One that's interesting to me because I actually did this with a mechanical pump. So TurboCAD, which we know who that is.
Sean Moat.
Yep. Yes. Thoughts on mechanical pumps and EFI, because I actually used a Hillborn pump for a circle track electronic injected car, and we actually had great luck with it. The way we started it, we pulled the injectors wide open at crank, and as soon as the engine picked up RPM, it went into an idle mode, and it worked. Yeah. It was fine. But what are your thoughts?
A well plumbed. So I like them. I like mechanical pumps. Number one, you need them for the alcohol and the methanol. Mechanical pumps, the best thing about them is they don't introduce noise into the electrical system. One of the biggest problems with an ECU is dealing with electrical bullshit noise from devices that consume lots of electrical power. And the fuel pump is like the number one offender. So if you get rid of that, you're my hero. As far as what I've seen performance-wise, they work great so long as they're mounted and plumbed properly. Talk to the tech guys for the pumps that you're buying. So for example, the cable drive pumps, all the Street Outlaw guys, I saw a lot of these there in the 405. Everybody had the cable drive pump where the pump's in the rear, but the cable goes up to the front to a belt drive deal. Well, that's optimal. It's expensive, but it's optimal because pumps like to push, not pull, right? At least all the pumps I know about. So you got to be careful. You got to have that pump mounted down low where it's got a decent gravity feed, where it's not having to suck too hard to get the fuel drawn into it. Once you got that taken care of, and if it's if it's plumbed properly, you won't even have to have a primer to build pressure when you go to crank it up. Rob Goss had a mechanical pump like that. That's the X275 Challenger that I was working on. He won the World Cup final, his class at WCF and up there in Maryland 2 months ago. But that's that black Challenger. He's on my Facebook. But his car, it was funny. Those guys have that thing just plumbed perfectly. You just bump the starter and the thing lights right off in the dead cold in the morning. It doesn't lose its prime or anything.
Yeah, it's pretty good. The pump we were working with, the Hellborn thing in the Circle Trek car, it wouldn't make any pressure at crank. It would make like 4. Yep. So you had to pull the injectors to get it open, but it would actually start up pretty well. It really wasn't bad.
Right. You got to be aware. There are some pumps that are where the pump is up front. Aeromotive makes a nice street one that goes up front. But the only issue, I know a guy that had a problem with that because he had the tank in the rear, and it wasn't gravity feeding enough to it, and it had issues. But otherwise, everyone else that I've seen using those that got that right, it worked really good. Mechanical pumps, and the net result here is much less of a current concern to get started up and priming pressure than you would think, especially with the modern pumps. Eliminates noise is a huge benefit. The downside is they tend to be expensive. Some of them are, the cable drive setups. You can have $3,500 in a cable drive fuel system real quick.
Sure.
The pump. But, worth it. Electronic guys like to see that because it gets rid of things that pollute the power supply in the car.
Gotcha. Okay, 2 more questions, and I think we're pretty good. This is a questions from James, and James, I don't know how to say your name. I think it's Falgout or Gout. I don't know. Falgout. Wants to know.
I know him.
Okay, wants to know how far you could take an E38 factory ECM, and I think that's probably a lot opinion, isn't it? Depending on what you're really willing to put up with.
I think. Gosh, so the good question. He needs to ask John Bewley. He's like the walking record keeper. Who's gone the fastest? I think you can go really, really fast with those, but the more you push the limits, the more you run out of things to do. It's a gray area, but I'll tell you this, that some guys come to me that have stretched their stock computer to the limits, and the things that they're having problems with is they're burning up individual holes because they're pushing enough air through the motor that now, what was a 5% difference in between cylinders as far as air reaching the combustion chamber at 400 horsepower, now at 13 or 1400 horsepower is a significant difference.
Yep.
Yeah. So what you need is, the guys I've got some guys that are really good at pushing stock stuff, and I love Matt Happel, but I've got guys that push it that far and go 200 passes or whatever. But and what they're doing is they're doing EGTs per cylinder, and they're adjusting timing and fuel per cylinder, right? And they're finding out that on certain intake and cam combinations that number 5 and number 7 tend to go first. Well, take a couple degrees out of that hole, put 4% more fuel in it, and just forget about it and start pushing the boost up a little bit more until you run into your next problem, or you start reading plugs and you see another hole looks like it might be splattering aluminum on the plug a little bit, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, kind of like a sequence of Band-Aids as you find the cuts.
Yeah, and that's really what it is, and that's what we're doing. I mean, there's a lot to be said. So a lot of this stuff I talk about isn't like an instant performance gain, but it's a longevity gain that'll get you more passes to learn where to find better performance.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Okay. Last question is from your host for, I guess, March 4th and 5th, Fonz Performance.
Fonz?
Yep. Megasquirt 3, difference between MS3 Pro and the Ultimate, if you could just explain that.
So the DIY Auto-Tune guys, they debuted this Ultimate at PRI. I'm sitting here looking at one right now. They're so cool. They sent me one. It's literally in my hand. They sent me one. Oh, I think they had 15 or 20 to go out before the production run went out. They just wanted people to give them some feedback. And so I'm sitting here testing it on my bench after we're done tonight. But the main difference, so it's the same processor as an MS3 Pro. So don't freak out if you just bought an MS3 Pro. The main difference is that it adds heavy-duty injector drivers. Specifically, they tested it with with multiple sets of billet atomizers.
Okay.
Which is kind of cool. These guys actually built the injector drivers around the injectors people want to use, which is something that a lot of companies built their ECU 5 years ago and didn't have this explosion of new different injectors out here. So the big thing there is you don't have to buy an external amplifier box for it if you want to drive a set of those crazy injectors.
Gotcha.
And then the other thing that they added was they added more inputs. So instead of having to expand, and add a CAN bus I/O extending device that goes on the network and takes more inputs, they have them built in here. And so it looks like they got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, like 23 more pins populated on here. So lots more inputs and a couple more outputs.
Nice. Okay. Pretty straightforward. So
same processor, same data logging, same guts. You could do the same thing with an MS3 Pro if you add a couple of external devices. But this one just came with the heavy duty drivers on board is the big thing.
Makes sense.
And they are well tested in heavy duty. I know those guys, they did a nice job. The one thing, the Megasquirt guys aren't always the best at putting out this great image, and they're known for these old kit-based systems that people would drag into a dyno shop and piss off professional tuners with. But their commercial products are pretty awesome,
Yeah, and that's one of those things you kind of, and when people think about the Megasquirt stuff or the the DIY stuff, they still have that in their head. That this is I got a circuit board and a box of parts. Yeah, it's no good.
Sure.
They got to move away from that somehow.
Yep. Now they're getting there. They're actually working towards that. That's it's funny. You see more and more of their stuff on faster and more serious cars now. So that's good for them.
Yep.
I don't at this point I'll work on anybody's stuff. I mean, there's a lot of good systems out there. I mean, Holley, what they've put out and the customer support. I worked on Pro Stock this last year, and Holley gave us amazing on-site support at the track. I mean, it was just ridiculous. They gave me the phone number to the engineers. If the guy at the track couldn't help you right away, I can call Doug. And it's so funny. It's which ECU you should choose to me is so much not about whose name or sticker is on the box, but like who can back it up with support, with good testing, so they didn't sell you something that's going to break right away. So good engineering, good support, training. It's those guys. If they put some effort into that, those are the manufacturers that you want to kind of be around.
Yeah.
Or work with.
Well, and that's probably one thing. I think the Holley has had an awful lot of market penetration from the introduction in a Pro Stock, and I think that really helped them, essentially crowdsourcing knowledge. They've got more sets of eyeballs on it.
Do you guys follow Fuel Tech at all? They're the ones that are on all the Pro Mods and the Door Slammers and the Keith Berrys and the Radio versus the World and lots of X275 cars. It's funny. They introduced that system to the racing community and pitched it to racers and then provide amazing on-site support for the racers. But that's actually a system that's really simple to use. Like, I don't know if people are listening and they're wondering about Fuel Tech, that was the one that the guys that designed it went into like super huge efforts to make this thing simple to use the first time. I mean, they really spent a ton of time writing their instructions and documentation and stuff like that. But that's another one. I think I really like Fuel Tech. I really like Holley. I really like Motec because these are all really well documented systems. I really like MS3 Pro because it's kind of my own personal, choice or whatever. It's a great system. Sometimes its documentation there's too much of it. But these systems are all neck and neck as far as how well they open your injectors and fire your ignition system, actual performance. They all do about the same thing.
Well, I would imagine over time they all kind of got to level out. They're gonna the incremental improvements that are going to be makeable here are going to get smaller and smaller, I would think.
Exactly.
All right.
Well, as Formula One just keeps on dropping down and letting us know what they're doing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, with all the rolls put on them, they got to get sneakier and sneakier. So who the hell knows with those guys?
I'm just waiting for the day I don't need an alternator because I got a turbocharger. Is that shit ever going to come down to us little guys, or is that ever? I don't know.
Actually, I think they're talking about it, but
I know. I mean, some of it, and when all the KERS stuff, came to be, I was like, are you really guys going to push hybrid, green energy into these things? But no, there's substantial benefit from this stuff. It's not a joke. They really found some interesting ways.
Formula One and all my buddies are complaining about the tech is too high. The teams are complaining that the tech is too expensive. I will and I don't want to offend the Formula One guys out there, but I think that's probably an example of why engineers need management. You know what I mean? They tend to run I had a guy tell me this once, a tooling manager at the Boeing plant in St. Louis told me this. He managed the whole tooling department there. You know, it's pretty aerospace stuff, and he's like, engineers tend to run the plow too deep. And that was a good way to put it. It's not nothing against the engineer guys because we need them to figure this stuff out, but it's funny. Sometimes I wonder if, you know, the poor guys that have to maintain and build and put these cars together were allowed to be at the meeting where the visionaries were coming up with all these crazy ideas.
Well, we can only imagine where we'll be tomorrow. That's all I can say.
Mike's always talking to the engineer constantly, so calling me up and complaining about it. So.
No, come on. Leave poor Fudd alone. He had a bad day. So,
who designed this oil filter? That guy's an idiot.
All right, Scott. So look, man, I'm really more than anything looking forward to going to the class up here, and we'll talk about that.
I'll put names on 2 seats for you guys, and then I'll talk to you offline about it here.
Yeah.
Mark your calendars, and then I'll come in there on the 6th if you're going to have a show.
Oh yeah, perfect.
Definitely.
We'll definitely have a show on the 6th, and what everybody should do if they're paying attention, not just to our live listeners, but all the people listen after this. If you got questions, you know, I put this friggin' phone system in to have multiple calls and people on hold with these grand visions, and usually I'm looking at one line. You know what I mean? So use the thing, for Christ's sakes. God, you're killing me.
Our featured guy, that's it.
All right, Scott. Well, again, man, it's been great. It's always great having you on. It's always good to talk to you.
We'll talk soon.
Definitely.
Fantastic.
See you guys in a couple months.
Thanks, Scott.
Thanks.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
You know, what a ton of information.
Oh, yeah. And it's just touching it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know how fucking nuts I'm going to get with some of this stuff. Like some of this stuff, like you're going to drill down through, like the fuel temperature thing makes all sense in the world.
Right.
I mean, why wouldn't you want to know the temperature? We used to do it on a dyno. Why wouldn't you?
Well, now the thing is, though, the mechanical fuel pumps are better than the electric because it's not introducing noise in the system. It's like, you know.
Makes sense.
And the pumps are a lot better now than they were 20 years ago. So.
Yeah. And, you know, now I'm even questioning some of the things that I had in my mind.
Yeah.
Boy, this poor guy, when he leaves here, he's going to be, I guarantee you, when he leaves here, he will not talk about fuel injection for 2 weeks. Because I'm going to be like the kid who's like, Mister, can I ask a question? Mister, can I ask a question?
But what about this? And
yep. It's going to be a rough day for him when he finally comes.
But the problem is, like he says, well, I can't explain that. You have to call the injector guy. You have to call this guy. It's like, you know, you're going to delve off into points that he can't even answer, you know?
Yep. Okay. Well, look, I had a lot of fun. And I think the most important thing is that while Tom is off on Operation NutBowl, we can still have a show from time to time without Thomas.
Yeah.
So it worked out okay. All right. Well, I think we'll be back next week.
I don't see a reason why not. But.
No, we'll be all right. We'll get somebody.
Yep.
And all right, guys, thanks for everything. Thanks for listening. Thanks for the questions. And please use the phones next week.
Call until I have to stop giving out a number for nothing.
All right. See you next week.